Tom Bradley pushed his cleaning cart down the empty corridor of Station Meridian 9. His back ached from 8 hours of scrubbing floors, and his stomach growled loud enough to echo off the metal walls. It was 2 in the morning and most sensible people were asleep in their quarters. The cafeteria lights were dimmed to night mode, casting long shadows across the rows of empty tables. Tom liked this time of night. No crowds. No noise. Just him and the hum of the station's life support systems. He grabbed his spray bottle and started wiping down tables, working his way from the entrance toward the back. That's when he noticed the kid. Small thing, maybe the size of a human 8-year-old, tucked into the corner booth like it was trying to disappear into the cushions. Tom had seen plenty of aliens in his 3 years working on the station, but Valorians were hard to miss. This one had scales that shimmered between blue and silver under the dim lights, and eyes that were way too big for its face. Kind of reminded Tom of those old pictures of lemurs he'd seen in school. The kid's clothes were a mess. Torn jacket, pants that didn't fit right, and one shoe that looked ready to fall apart. Tom had seen cleaner outfits in donation bins. He kept wiping tables, pretending not to notice. The station had rules about bothering passengers, even the small ones. But he couldn't help watching from the corner of his eye. The kid wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, staring at the trash bins near the food dispensers. Every time someone walked by and tossed out leftovers, those big eyes followed the movement like a cat watching a bird. Tom's chest tightened. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself when he was 12 and his mom was between jobs. That desperate, hungry stare that tried so hard to look casual. He glanced down at his lunch bag sitting on top of his cart. Inside was a turkey sandwich his neighbor had made for him, an apple and a bag of chips. His stomach growled again, reminding him he'd skipped breakfast to save money. The station didn't pay janitors enough to eat out, and making rent on a space station wasn't cheap. But the kid looked worse off than him. Tom walked over slowly, keeping his movements calm. Didn't want to scare the little guy. "Hey there, buddy," he said softly. The kid's head snapped up, eyes wide with something that looked like fear. Its whole body tensed like it was ready to run. Tom held up his hands. "Easy. I'm not gonna hurt you." He pulled out the sandwich and apple, setting them on the table. "You hungry?" For a second nothing happened. The kid just stared at the food like it might disappear. Then, faster than Tom expected, small scaled hands grabbed the sandwich. The kid tore into it like a starving animal, barely chewing before swallowing. The apple disappeared just as fast. Tom felt his throat tighten. When was the last time this kid ate? "Where are your parents?" Tom asked gently. The kid just stared at him with those enormous eyes. Didn't say a word. "You got somewhere to sleep?" Nothing. Either the kid didn't speak English or didn't want to talk. Tom knew better than to push. The station was full of people running from something. Sometimes the best thing you could do was mind your business and offer what help you could. "All right," Tom said. "You need anything else?" The kid shook its head slightly, still clutching the empty sandwich wrapper. Tom nodded and went back to his cleaning. But something in his gut twisted. He'd been hungry before. He'd been alone before. He couldn't walk away from this. The next night Tom brought 2 sandwiches. He found the kid in the same corner booth and set the food down without a word. The kid ate just as desperately as before. Third night, same thing. Tom added an extra juice box. Fourth night he brought a package of cookies too. The kid's eyes lit up when it saw them. By the 5th night Tom started looking forward to it. The kid would be waiting in that corner booth and Tom would deliver dinner like clockwork. Still no words between them, but the kid started giving him these little nods. Almost like a thank you. 6th night Tom noticed the kid looked a bit stronger. Not so hollow around the eyes. Still wearing those terrible clothes, but at least the hunger look was fading. Tom started thinking maybe he should report this to station services. Get the kid some real help. But he'd heard stories about how slow the system moved. How kids got lost in the paperwork. How sometimes helping meant the wrong people asking the wrong questions. So he kept quiet and kept bringing food. On the 7th night, Tom arrived at the cafeteria with an extra big meal. He'd even grabbed a blanket from the donation center, thinking the kid might need it. But the corner booth was empty. Tom checked the whole cafeteria, looked behind counters, even peeked into the kitchen. Nothing. The kid was gone. He told himself it was good news. Maybe the kid found its family. Maybe someone else helped. Maybe it got on a transport to somewhere better. But Tom couldn't shake the worried feeling in his chest as he pushed his cart toward the exit. He hoped the kid was okay. Hoped those 7 meals had been enough to make a difference. He had no idea that tomorrow his entire life was about to change. Tom walked through the station entrance like he did every night, his ID badge beeping as usual. But something felt wrong immediately. The air was too tense. Too quiet in the wrong way. Then he saw them. Soldiers. Everywhere. Not the regular station security guards he was used to seeing. These were different. They wore armor that gleamed like fresh blood under the corridor lights, covering them from head to toe. Each one carried weapons that hummed with a low, threatening energy that made Tom's teeth ache. He'd never seen guns like that before, and he didn't want to know what they could do. Tom's heart started hammering. In 3 years working on Meridian 9, he'd never seen a lockdown like this. The station felt frozen. People stood pressed against walls, speaking in whispers, looking terrified. A merchant he recognized from the market level stood with his hands raised, trembling as 2 soldiers scanned him with handheld devices. Tom spotted his supervisor near the cafeteria entrance. Linda was a tough woman who'd worked in space stations for 20 years. He'd seen her face down drunk miners and break up fights without breaking a sweat. But right now she looked scared. "Linda, what's happening?" Tom asked, keeping his voice low. She grabbed his arm and pulled him aside, her fingers digging in hard. "Valerian Imperial Guard," she whispered. Her face had gone pale, making the freckles across her nose stand out. "They showed up an hour ago. Sealed every entrance. Nobody in or out." Tom felt his stomach twist. The Valerian Empire was one of the big powers in this sector. Rich. Powerful. Not the kind of people you wanted showing up at your door unannounced. "What do they want?" he asked. Linda's eyes went wide with fear. "They're looking for someone. A human." She swallowed hard. "Tom, they're asking for you by name." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What? Me? Why would they want me?" "I don't know, but this isn't good." Linda's voice shook. "When the Valerian Empire comes looking for someone specifically, it's never good news. People who get taken by the Imperial Guard don't always come back." Tom's mind raced. What had he done? He was a janitor. He cleaned floors and wiped tables. He didn't mess with politics or crime. The worst thing he'd done lately was steal an extra roll from the cafeteria buffet. Unless, his mind flashed to the kid. The alien kid he'd been feeding. But that didn't make sense. How would anyone even know about that? And why would feeding a hungry kid get him in trouble? Before he could ask more questions, Linda's face went even paler. She was looking past his shoulder. Tom turned around slowly. 2 guards stood behind him. Up close, their armor looked even more intimidating. It wasn't just red, he realized. It had patterns etched into it, swirling designs that seemed to move in the light. Their helmets completely covered their faces, showing only a dark reflective surface where their eyes should be. "You are Tom Bradley?" The voice came from the guard on the left. It sounded mechanical, processed through the helmet. Tom's mouth felt dry as sand. "Yeah, that's me. Come with us. The Supreme Commander wishes to speak with you." Supreme Commander. Tom felt his knees go weak. That was military. High-level military. This was so much worse than he'd thought. "Am I under arrest?" His voice came out steadier than he felt. "You are being summoned. Come. Now." Tom looked at Linda. She looked back at him with obvious pity and fear. This was how people disappeared in space. You got taken by the wrong people and your family never found out what happened. Your body got spaced if you were lucky. If you weren't lucky, well, Tom didn't want to think about that. "Okay," he said. "I'm coming." The guards moved to either side of him, not touching him but making it clear he didn't have a choice. They marched him through the corridor. Every step felt like walking to his execution. People stared as they passed. The crowds parted instantly, pressing themselves against walls to get out of the way. Tom recognized faces. The woman who ran the noodle shop. The engineer who always joked with him during night shifts. The kid who sold newspapers near the docking bay. They all watched him with expressions mixing fear and sympathy. This was it. This was how Tom Bradley died. 32 years old, killed for some reason he couldn't even understand. They reached the main gate and Tom's breath caught in his throat. There must have been 200 soldiers standing in perfect formation. Rows and rows of blood-red armor, weapons at ready, standing absolutely still like statues. The display of force was overwhelming. Tom had never seen this many armed soldiers in one place in his entire life. In the center of the formation stood a Valerian that made Tom's brain struggle to process what he was seeing. This one was huge, at least 7 feet tall, wearing armor that wasn't red but gold. Real gold, from the looks of it, gleaming bright enough to hurt Tom's eyes. The armor was covered in more of those swirling patterns, but also symbols that looked important. Military ranks, probably. This had to be the Supreme Commander. Tom's guard escorts pushed him forward, forcing him to walk toward the golden figure. His legs felt like jelly. This was really it. This was where he died. Then he saw who was standing next to the commander. The kid. His kid. The hungry alien kid from the cafeteria. But the kid wasn't wearing torn clothes anymore. Now it wore robes that looked like they cost more than Tom made in a year. Deep purple fabric with silver threading. A small circlet rested on its head. Tom's brain completely shut down for a second. Nothing made sense. Why was the kid here? Why was the kid dressed like royalty? Why was Tom about to die? The kid looked at him, and those big eyes that Tom remembered so well suddenly went wide with recognition. And that's when Tom realized he'd made a terrible mistake. He just didn't know what kind yet. The Supreme Commander took a step forward, and Tom instinctively took a step back. The Valorian's voice was deep and powerful, echoing across the entire plaza like thunder rolling through the station. "You are Tom Bradley, sanitation worker of this station?" Tom's throat felt tight. His hands were shaking so badly he shoved them in his pockets. Yeah. Janitor." His voice came out weak and small compared to the commander's boom. He glanced at the kid again, that familiar little face now surrounded by expensive robes and guards. "Look, if the kid stole something I didn't know about it. I just gave him some food. I didn't mean any trouble." Silence. The word cracked like a whip. Tom's mouth snapped shut. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his ears. This was it. He'd somehow broken some alien law he didn't know about. Maybe feeding someone without permission was illegal in their culture. Maybe he'd insulted them somehow. He'd heard stories about humans getting executed for accidentally violating customs they didn't understand. Then something impossible happened. The Supreme Commander, this massive warrior in golden armor who commanded 200 soldiers, slowly lowered himself to one knee. Tom's brain couldn't process it. For a second he thought the commander was tying his boot or something. But then, like a wave rolling across the plaza, every single soldier dropped to one knee in perfect unison. The sound of 200 armored warriors kneeling at once echoed through the station like distant thunder. Tom looked around wildly. What's happening? People in the crowd were staring with their mouths open. Station security looked just as confused as Tom felt. Linda stood near the back, her hand covering her mouth in shock. The commander's voice when he spoke again had changed. It wasn't threatening anymore. It sounded heavy. Sad even. "This child," he said, gesturing to the kid beside him, "is Prince Keldar Valdorian, third heir to the Valerian imperial throne." Tom's legs went weak. "Prince." The word bounced around his skull. The hungry kid in torn clothes was a prince. Royalty. Third in line to rule an empire that controlled dozens of star systems. 8 weeks ago, the commander continued, His Highness was kidnapped by enemies of the throne. Political rivals who sought to destabilize the royal family. They took him from the palace during a celebration. We searched everywhere. Every station, every planet in this sector. His captors were clever. They kept moving, staying ahead of our search. Tom stared at the kid. The prince. Those big eyes looked back at him with the same quiet sadness Tom remembered from the cafeteria. 3 weeks ago his captors panicked. Our net was closing. They knew they could not escape with him, so they did the cruelest thing possible. The commander's voice cracked with emotion. They abandoned him here. Left a prince of the Valerian Empire alone on this station, dressed in rags with no identification, no money, no way to contact us. They left him to starve to death in a crowd of strangers. Tom felt sick. The kid had been alone for 3 weeks? No wonder he looked so desperate. We did not know he was here until yesterday, the commander said. We finally captured one of the kidnappers. He told us where they left the prince, laughing that we would never find him because he would already be dead. The plaza was silent except for the hum of the station's systems. Tom could hear his own breathing. We arrived expecting to find a body, the commander continued, his voice thick. Instead we found our prince alive. Federal recovering. And when we asked him how he survived, he told us about you. Tom's mouth felt dry. I didn't know who he was. I just saw a hungry kid. Exactly. The commander stood and all the soldiers rose with him. For 7 days our prince sat in that cafeteria. Thousands of Valorians passed through this station. Merchants, travelers, soldiers off duty. Our own people. They walked past their prince and not one stopped to help. Tom saw shame flash across the commander's face. Our society has become poisoned, the commander said. We have rigid ranks. Strict social levels. We are taught from birth to recognize status, to respect those above us and ignore those beneath us. A Valerian in fine clothes receives every courtesy. A Valerian in rags becomes invisible. His voice grew harder. Thousands of my people saw a hungry child and looked away because he appeared to have no rank. No status. No worth. Tom thought about all those nights. The kid sitting alone, watching people throw away food while he starved. And nobody helped. Nobody even looked. But you, the commander turned his full attention to Tom, a human janitor with no knowledge of his identity, no understanding of what he might offer in return, fed him. You gave him your own food. You came back night after night. You asked nothing. Expected nothing. You simply saw a child who needed help and helped him. He was hungry, Tom said quietly. What else was I supposed to do? The commander's expression softened. That question. That simple question reveals everything. You helped because you could not imagine doing otherwise. This is not how Valorians think anymore. We calculate. We measure worth. We ask what we gain. The prince stepped forward then, moving away from the commander. His small voice carried across the plaza. You saw me when no one else did. Tom looked at the kid, at those familiar eyes that had watched him with such desperate hope in the cafeteria. Without thinking, he dropped to one knee so they were at eye level. Hey buddy, Tom said softly. You doing okay? They treating you right now? The prince's eyes filled with tears. Then he rushed forward and wrapped his small arms around Tom's neck, hugging him tight. Tom hugged him back automatically, the way you hug any scared kid. Behind them, 200 soldiers stood at perfect attention, weapons gleaming, watching this moment in absolute silence. You invoked the Kalseth, the commander said quietly. An ancient law our people have nearly forgotten. The life debt. You saved the prince's life and asked nothing in return. By our oldest laws you have honored us and shamed us both. You showed us what we have lost. Tom held the kid, this prince, and realized something stunning. This wasn't an arrest. This was an honor guard. For him. Tom barely slept that night. He kept replaying everything in his mind. The soldiers. The prince. The fact that he'd accidentally saved royalty without knowing it. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 200 warriors kneeling in the plaza. The next morning, Linda knocked on his quarters before his alarm even went off. Tom, you need to get up. They're back. He threw on his uniform, still half asleep, and stumbled to the station's main conference room. What he saw there made him stop dead in the doorway. The room was filled with Valorians in formal robes. Not soldiers this time, but officials. They had set up a massive holographic display showing documents, maps, and numbers that made Tom's head spin. At the head of the table sat a Valorian who looked ancient, with scales that had faded to almost white with age. Tom Bradley, the old Valorian said, standing. I am first advisor to Emperor Valdorian himself. I speak with his voice and authority. Tom's stomach dropped again. The Emperor. They'd sent someone who spoke for the actual Emperor. Please sit. The advisor gestured to a chair that looked way too fancy for a janitor. Tom sat carefully, feeling completely out of place. The chair was more comfortable than his bed. The advisor activated the holographic display. Images floated in the air between them. The Emperor has decreed that the life debt must be repaid. You saved his grandson. Therefore he offers you the following. Documents appeared in the air, rotating slowly so Tom could see them. Except he couldn't read the Valorian script. 3 estates on the Valorian homeworld, the advisor said, pointing to images of massive buildings surrounded by gardens. Each is over 200 acres. Servants included, of course. Tom stared. One of those buildings was bigger than the entire station sector he lived in. A noble title. You would become Lord Bradley of House Terra, with full voting rights in the Imperial Senate. Wait, what? Tom's brain was struggling to keep up. 40 million credits transferred immediately to an account in your name. 40 million. Tom made 30,000 a year. He couldn't even imagine that much money. A private ship, custom built to your specifications. Faster than light, capable, with a crew of 20. More images appeared. Sleek ships that looked like they belonged in movies, not real life. A personal guard detail for your protection. An apartment in the Imperial City. Access to. Tom held up his hand. Stop. Please. The entire room went silent. Every Valorian stared at him. The advisor's expression was unreadable. I can't accept any of that, Tom said. You could have heard a pin drop. The advisors looked at each other in confusion. One of them started speaking rapidly in Valorian to another. The first advisor held up his hand for silence. I do not understand, he said slowly. You refuse the Emperor's gift? I'm not refusing to honor him or anything, Tom said quickly. But I don't want estates or titles or ships. That's not me. I'm a janitor. I clean floors. I wouldn't know what to do with a noble title. The advisor leaned forward. Then the Emperor has gravely miscalculated. He believed these were appropriate gifts. If they are insufficient, please name your price. Anything within the Empire's power to grant is yours. Tom shook his head. You're not understanding me. I don't want a price. I wasn't doing a job. I was just doing what anyone should do. A kid was hungry. I fed him. That's it. The confusion in the room was thick enough to cut. These people didn't understand. To them, everything had a price. Everything was a transaction. Then what do you want? The advisor's voice held genuine bewilderment. Tom thought about that night in the cafeteria. The prince eating that sandwich like it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. Not because it was fancy food. Because he was starving. Then Tom thought about all the others. The refugees sleeping in maintenance corridors because they couldn't afford quarters. The kids digging through trash for scraps. The old woman who begged near the docking bay who everyone ignored. This station has hundreds of people nobody sees, Tom said. Refugees who couldn't afford passage anywhere else. Kids who got separated from their families. People who ran out of money between destinations. They sleep in corners. They go through trash looking for food. They're invisible. The advisors were listening now, really listening. I want something for them. A real shelter. A place with beds and hot meals. Medical care. Someone to help them figure out their next step. A place where nobody has to be hungry or invisible. The first advisor was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke in Valerian to the others. They responded, their voices rising with what sounded like argument. Finally the advisor turned back to Tom. The Emperor decrees it shall be done. Relief flooded through Tom. Thank you. That's all 100 such facilities across Valerian space. Tom blinked. What? I just meant one. Here on the station. The Emperor does not repay debts with half measures. 100 facilities. On every major station and planet under Valerian control. Each will provide shelter, food, medical care, and assistance. Each will bear your name. The Bradley Sanctuaries. I don't need my name on them. It is not a request. The advisor's voice was firm but not unkind. It is a debt repaid. Your name will remind our people of their shame and their hope. That a human janitor saw worth where Valorians saw nothing. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. The door opened and Prince Keldar walked in, still wearing those royal robes. He looked so different from the scared kid in torn clothes. The prince walked directly to Tom and looked up at him with those big eyes. When I rule, the prince said, his voice small but steady, I will remember this. I will remember that a janitor saw an emperor where my own people saw nothing. I will remember that worth is not something you wear. It is something you give. Tom knelt down again. You're gonna be a good emperor someday, kid. The prince smiled. Because a good human showed me how. Behind them, the first advisor began issuing orders in Valerian. The holographic displays shifted, showing construction plans and budgets. The machine was already in motion. Tom had just changed an empire without meaning to. All because he couldn't stand to see a kid go hungry. 6 months had passed since the day Tom's life turned upside down. People kept expecting him to quit his job, move somewhere fancy, live like a celebrity. But here he was, pushing the same cleaning cart down the same corridors at 2 in the morning. Some things just felt right and this was one of them. The station looked different now though. Decks 14, 15, and 16 had been completely transformed. Where there used to be empty storage areas and forgotten maintenance rooms, now stood the Bradley Sanctuary. The construction crews had worked around the clock for 3 months, and the result was something Tom still couldn't quite believe. The entrance had automatic doors that slid open silently. Inside, the main hall was warm and bright, nothing like the cold metal corridors of the rest of the station. Real plants grew in planters along the walls. Comfortable chairs sat in clusters where people could talk or just rest. And the smell, that was what got Tom every time. Fresh bread. Hot soup. Real food cooking in industrial kitchens that could feed hundreds. Tom paused his mopping to look through the sanctuary windows as he passed. Even at this hour, people moved around inside. A Drellian family sat at a table, the kids coloring on paper while their parents filled out housing applications with a volunteer. An elderly human woman Tom recognized from the lower decks was being checked by a medical robot in the clinic area. A group of teenagers, mix of different species, laughed together over a card game in the recreation zone. Nobody was hungry. Nobody was invisible. The story had spread fast. Humans had always been considered weird by most alien species. Too emotional, too unpredictable, too likely to do things that didn't make logical sense. But after news got out about Tom and the prince, something shifted. Now when aliens talked about humans they said something different. They said humans were the species that saw people, not positions. The ones who helped without calculating the benefit first. Tom had watched news reports from across the galaxy. The Valerian Empire was changing, slowly dismantling the rigid social ranks that had defined them for centuries. It wasn't fast and it wasn't easy. There were protests from nobles who didn't want to lose their privileges. But the Emperor himself had appeared on broadcasts, with Prince Keldar at his side, talking about remembering old values. About seeing worth in everyone. Other species were watching. Some were inspired. Tom had heard that 3 other governments had started their own sanctuary programs. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. All because Tom had shared a sandwich. He still brought extra food on his rounds. He couldn't help it. It was habit now, ingrained deeper than any royal decree could change. Tonight he had 2 apples and a protein bar in his cart pocket. Just in case. Tom? He turned to see Linda walking toward him, holding her tablet. She'd been promoted to assistant station manager after everything happened, though she still made time to check on him during night shifts. The Valerian ambassador wants to meet with you again, she said, shaking her head with amusement. That's the 3rd time this month. Tom kept mopping. Tell him I'm busy. Linda raised an eyebrow. You're mopping a floor. Exactly. Tom grinned at her. Someone's gotta do it. These floors don't clean themselves. You know you're probably the only person in the galaxy who turns down weekly meetings with ambassadors to mop floors, right? Good. I'd hate to think there were others as stubborn as me. Linda laughed and walked away, already typing the polite rejection message on her tablet. Tom finished the corridor and headed toward the sanctuary entrance. Despite his protests, they'd installed a plaque on the wall next to the doors. It was made of polished metal, with words engraved in multiple languages so everyone could read it. Rank is what others give you. Worth is what you give yourself. See the person, not the position. Below that, in smaller text, in honor of Tom Bradley, who fed a prince and taught an empire to see. Tom still thought it was too much. Too fancy for what he'd done. He'd mentioned this to the sanctuary director at least a dozen times. She just smiled and told him the plaque was staying. Through the sanctuary windows, Tom watched a little girl, couldn't have been more than 6, sitting at a table with a huge plate of food in front of her. She was some species Tom didn't recognize, with purple skin and antennae. But her smile was universal as she stuffed noodles into her mouth, getting sauce all over her face. Her mother sat next to her, laughing and wiping her chin with a napkin. 6 months ago that kid might have been the one in the corner watching others eat, stomach empty and hope fading. Not anymore. Tom's chest felt tight in a good way. Maybe the plaque was okay after all. Maybe some stories were worth telling, even if they made him uncomfortable. Because it wasn't really about him. It was about remembering. About not forgetting to see the people right in front of you. A young Valerian walked past, heading into the sanctuary. The kid saw Tom in his janitor uniform and stopped. Then, to Tom's surprise, the Valerian placed his hand over his heart and bowed slightly. A gesture of respect. Tom nodded back, feeling awkward. The Valerian smiled. Thank you for reminding us how to see. Then he was gone, disappearing into the sanctuary to volunteer for the night shift serving meals. Tom went back to his mopping, pushing the cart toward the next section of floor that needed cleaning. His back still ached. His pay was still the same. His apartment was still tiny. Nothing about his actual life had changed. But everything was different. Somewhere out there, Prince Keldar was growing up, learning to rule an empire with new eyes. 100 sanctuaries across Valerian space fed people who used to be invisible. Other species were starting to question their own systems, their own assumptions about worth and rank. And it all started because Tom Bradley couldn't walk past a hungry kid without doing something about it. He smiled to himself as he mopped, thinking about that first night. That scared little face. That desperate hunger. That simple choice to share his dinner. Some of the best things in the universe started small. Sometimes all it took was a sandwich and someone willing to see another person's need. Tom pushed his cart forward, whistling quietly, ready for another night of work. Some habits were worth keeping. The end.